Taehyung's earliest memories were not filled with laughter or warmth. The Kim mansion, vast and glittering from the outside, had always felt like a cage to him. Behind the polished walls and grand chandeliers lay fear, cruelty, and isolation, his stepmother's shadow looming over every moment of his life. As a child, Taehyung was timid, gentle, and trusting, but to his stepmother, he was nothing more than a tool to assert control. She would belittle him constantly, making sure he felt small, worthless, and unwanted. Every mistake, no matter how tiny, was met with sharp words, harsh slaps, and endless ridicule. When Taehyung was just 7 years old, the abuse escalated to something far darker. One evening, after accidentally spilling water on her favorite carpet, his stepmother's face twisted with rage. She grabbed him roughly by the arm, dragging him down the long corridor to a small, windowless room in the far corner of the house. The door slammed shut behind him with a hollow thud, leaving him in pitch-black darkness. The smell hit him first, musty, wet, and terrifying. He fumbled along the walls, his tiny fingers brushing against droppings, the cold floor beneath him sticky. And then he heard it, the skittering of rats. They moved quickly, their sharp claws scratching against the floor and walls. Panic seized him. Taehyung screamed at the top of his lungs, pounding on the door. "Help! Please! Someone help me!" But no one came. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed in a blur of terror. He could feel the rats brushing against his skin, their tiny teeth nipping at his heels. His small body shook violently, and tears streamed down his cheeks. But the darkness swallowed his cries. The cruel laughter of his stepmother echoed faintly through the walls, a reminder that this was punishment, and no one would rescue him. By the time she finally opened the door, Taehyung was pale, trembling uncontrollably, and silent. His voice, once soft and timid, had disappeared. He tried to speak, tried to explain the horror, but the words refused to come. The trauma was too much. The fear, the isolation, the helplessness. It had stolen his voice. From that day forward, Taehyung became mute, not by choice, but by the cruel weight of his experiences. He learned quickly that silence was safer. If he said nothing, perhaps no one would notice him or hurt him. If he spoke, it might invite more anger, more punishment. And so the boy grew up behind a wall of quiet, his heart heavy with unspoken pain, his eyes holding the stories he could never tell. Even as he matured, the echoes of that dark room haunted him. The smell, the cold, the rats, the isolation. And deep down, he carried the unshakable fear that no one could love a boy who had been broken in silence. The mansion was quiet again the next morning, but the atmosphere felt different, less cold, less formal, as if the air itself had softened. Jungkook moved through the hallways with a heightened awareness of Taehyung's presence. The panic of the previous night had left a residue of unease in Taehyung, and Jungkook's instincts were sharper than ever. He found Taehyung in the kitchen, delicately arranging a tray with tea and toast. His hands were careful, deliberate, precise, still carrying that old habit of control from years of surviving cruelty. Jungkook paused in the doorway, observing. "You don't have to do that," Jungkook said softly, stepping closer. "I can handle breakfast." Taehyung froze, eyes flicking toward him, and then immediately lowered again, almost ashamed that he had been preparing it at all. Jungkook's chest tightened. I just thought. Taehyung's hand trembled slightly as he placed the final piece of toast on the tray. Words weren't coming, but Jungkook understood. A subtle gesture, the smallest act of care, and his heart thudded against his ribs. "You didn't have to," he said again, kneeling to take the tray. "But thank you." Taehyung blinked, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, then nodded. That nod alone said more than words ever could. The days blended into one another, quiet but heavy with unspoken emotions. Small moments became their language. The way Taehyung poured tea just so. The way he lingered near Jungkook without intruding. The tiny glances that flickered and disappeared before Jungkook could fully capture them. All of it began weaving a delicate thread between them. The afternoon sun cast soft golden light across the mansion's polished floors. The tranquility of the garden was interrupted by the sudden, deliberate click of heels on marble. Taehyung stiffened, sensing the unwelcome presence before they even stepped into the hall. "Taehyung-ah," a smooth, cold voice called, dripping with false sweetness. It was Han-Soo-jin, his stepmother, her designer bag dangling from her wrist like a weapon. Behind her, his father trailed with an indifferent expression, as though he were merely accompanying her for appearances. Taehyung's chest tightened. Memories of harsh words, cruel laughter, and endless mental manipulation bubbled up, each one sharper than the last. He shrank slightly, lowering his gaze, hands clenching into fists at his sides. Hyejin smiled, venom masked by elegance. "We came to see our dear Taehyung. My, you look so different. So quiet." Her eyes flicked toward Jungkook, lingering like a challenge. Jungkook's sharp gaze caught the subtle malice in her tone immediately. His hand brushed slightly against Taehyung's, a silent anchor. But his eyes never left Hyejin. "Is there something you need?" he asked, calm but firm. Hyejin's smile tightened. "Oh, nothing urgent. Just checking on my stepson. I do hope you're adjusting well to married life. You must remember, Taehyung, your family's reputation is..." Her words dripped with judgment. But Taehyung flinched at every syllable. He had heard this before. Insults, thinly veiled as concern. Reminders of inadequacy drilled into him since childhood. His voice caught in his throat, his fingers trembling as he fidgeted with the hem of his sleeve. Before Hyejin could continue, Jungkook stepped closer, his presence towering but steady, protective. His voice was low, carrying weight without yelling. "That's enough." Hyejin tilted her head, incredulous. "Excuse me? You dare?" Taehyung's heart pounded in his chest, but he felt a spark of courage at Jungkook's side. Something inside him shifted. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone to face the storm. Summoning every ounce of strength, he stepped forward, his hands rising slightly in a gesture of defiance. His eyes, deep, unspoken yet screaming with restrained pain, met Hyejin's. Though his voice was absent, the intensity in his gaze said everything. "I will not be afraid. Not anymore." Jungkook's hand found his, squeezing gently, anchoring him, and then he faced Hyejin fully. "You are not welcome here to hurt him. He is my husband, and I will not let anyone treat him this way." Hyejin's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, a flash of anger and disbelief crossing her features. Taehyung felt the tremor of fear in his chest, but Jungkook's steady presence was like sunlight cutting through darkness. Taehyung took a deep breath and gestured sharply at her, his chin lifting in defiance. His stepmother's eyes widened at the silent confrontation. Her stepson, the boy she had tried to break mentally, was finally standing up for himself. Jungkook mirrored his stance, silent but fierce. Together, they radiated a shield of unspoken strength. Hyejin's smile turned brittle. "We'll see about that," she hissed, retreating slightly but maintaining her posture of superiority. Jungkook didn't move. His gaze never wavered. "Leave now, or I will ask you to leave permanently." Taehyung does not need this, and neither do I. For the first time, Taehyung felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Safe. The weight on his chest lifted slightly, replaced by the warmth of being seen, being protected, being loved in a way that words could barely express. Huye Jin's fury simmered, but she knew the fight had shifted. With one last scornful glance, she signaled Minho, and they left, heels clicking against the floor, leaving behind the oppressive air. Taehyung exhaled, trembling, and Jungkook drew him into a protective hug, resting his chin gently on Taehyung's head. "You don't have to face them alone anymore," he whispered softly. Taehyung buried his face in Jungkook's chest, the silent tears spilling freely now, not of fear, but of relief. For the first time, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he could finally belong somewhere. Somewhere safe, warm, and filled with love. The evening air was cool and quiet, the mansion dimly lit by golden chandeliers. Taehyung sat near the fireplace, knees drawn up to his chest, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. Jungkook lingered nearby, watching silently. It had become a pattern now, shared silences, small gestures, and moments where the world shrank to just the two of them. Tonight, something in the firelight made Jungkook's chest tighten. The way Taehyung's shoulders curved inward, the fragile tension in his hands, the quiet courage it took him to simply exist without flinching. Jungkook moved closer, sitting on the rug beside him. "You don't have to sit alone," he murmured, voice soft. Taehyung hesitated, then tilted his head slightly. A silent invitation. He shifted, letting Jungkook's presence draw near. The first touch was tentative. Jungkook brushed a stray lock of hair from Taehyung's face, fingers lingering at the temple. Taehyung didn't pull away, his first sign of trust in this intimate space. A shiver ran through him, and Jungkook noticed, chest tightening with protectiveness. Slowly, carefully, Jungkook extended an arm. "Come closer," he whispered. Taehyung leaned in, almost imperceptibly. Jungkook's arm wrapped around his shoulders, pulling him gently into a side hug. The warmth of Jungkook's body pressed against him, solid and grounding. For the first time, Taehyung allowed himself to breathe fully, the walls of fear around him softening. Minutes passed in silence, the only sound, the crackle of the fire, and the steady rhythm of their breathing. And yet, that silence carried weight, a shared intimacy deeper than words could capture. Taehyung rested his head lightly on Jungkook's chest, and the small contact sent a rush of something unspoken through them both. "You're safe," Jungkook whispered, tone almost a caress. "I've got you." Taehyung's hand brushed against Jungkook's arm, hesitant at first, then firmer. It was a gesture of trust and gratitude, and Jungkook responded by tightening the hug just slightly, anchoring him against the shadows of the past. The minutes stretched, suspended in warmth and quiet understanding. Then, tentatively, Taehyung moved closer, pressing himself into Jungkook's chest with a subtle, deliberate urgency. Jungkook's fingers threaded into his hair, holding him close, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. The emotional intimacy began to bloom into something deeper. Jungkook's hand moved gently from shoulder to back, mapping out the tense lines of muscles still hardened by years of fear. Taehyung shivered, leaning instinctively closer, seeking the warmth, the reassurance, the unspoken promise of protection. "Detract me. Trust me," Jungkook murmured softly, almost to himself. Taehyung didn't respond verbally. Instead, he pressed his lips against Jungkook's chest in a fleeting, delicate kiss, eyes closing briefly. A silent answer, filled with vulnerability, gratitude, and an emerging desire. The firelight danced across their faces, illuminating the tender expressions that words could never convey. Each touch, each brush of skin against skin, carried weight. Their closeness was not rushed. It was deliberate, careful, and intimate. Every contact deepened their bond. Every shared breath became a bridge between past pain and present comfort. Jungkook's hands cupped Taehyung's face gently, lifting it until their eyes met. The intensity in the gaze was raw, unguarded, and full of emotion. Slowly, hesitantly, their lips met in a soft, lingering kiss, a culmination of trust, longing, and tenderness. The moment stretched, delicate and fragile, until the fire's warmth and their shared closeness dissolved the remaining distance between them. Taehyung melted into Jungkook's embrace, trembling slightly, but for the first time, trembling with something other than fear.
They parted only to breathe, foreheads resting together. The mansion, the shadows, the walls, they all faded. There was only this, the warmth of each other, the safety found in the other's arms, and the promise of more moments like this to come. Jungkook whispered, "I won't let anyone hurt you. Not ever. Not again." Taehyung's response was a small, shivering nod against his chest. Words weren't needed. Not now. Their closeness, the tenderness, the slow intimacy, this was their language, their sanctuary, and the beginning of love that would heal the wounds of the past. The days became a rhythm of shared life. Breakfast together, quiet walks in the garden, evenings by the fire, lingering touches in hallways, and soft kisses in corners of empty rooms. Jungkook began noticing more. The way Taehyung flinched at sudden noises, the way his hands trembled when nervous, the small smile he gave when praised or appreciated. Every small gesture was a window into his past, a glimpse of the fragile soul beneath layers of trauma. He held Taehyung a little longer, kissed him a little more carefully, whispered reassurances whenever shadows of the past surfaced, and Taehyung, in turn, allowed himself to trust completely, leaning on Jungkook's chest, pressing his warmth against him, offering quiet, tender acts of care in return. The mansion, once cold and forbidding, now hummed with intimacy, trust, and desire. The walls no longer carried judgment, they carried warmth. And in the quiet darkness, with bodies close, fingers entwined, and hearts beating together, the two men had created a world where scars could heal, where love could flourish, and where the past could finally rest. The night was quiet, but the mansion felt alive with a warmth that had never been there before. Taehyung and Jungkook lay together in the bedroom, bodies pressed close, breaths mingling in the soft darkness. The fire from the fireplace outside the window cast flickering shadows across the room, painting their skin in warm golds and soft browns. Jungkook's hand traced the curve of Taehyung's back, careful, gentle, lingering where the tension of old scars still lived. Taehyung shivered slightly at the touch, but leaned into it, letting himself relax in the safety of Jungkook's arms. The intimacy was slow, deliberate, filled with pauses where neither spoke, only breathed and shivered in the heat of shared warmth. Each kiss, each soft sigh deepened their connection, not just physical, but emotional. By the early hours, they lay tangled together, hearts beating in sync, the silence around them more comforting than any words. Eventually, Jungkook rolled slightly, planting a soft kiss on Taehyung's forehead. "I'll make you breakfast," he whispered. "You stay here." Taehyung nodded, still nestled against him, and watched Jungkook leave for the kitchen. There was a domestic intimacy in the gesture, a rhythm of shared life that had begun to feel natural. The kitchen was warm with the smell of butter and sizzling onions. Jungkook moved with ease, flipping eggs, stirring sauces, humming softly. He was entirely focused on cooking, lost in the care of preparing something for Taehyung. Outside the kitchen window, the morning sunlight streamed in, but Jungkook didn't notice the faint smoke curling from the stove. The flame had licked up slightly from the pan, small at first, but growing fast. But before he could act, the smoke thickened, the acrid scent filling the kitchen. Jungkook! The scream was sharp, piercing, raw. It was Taehyung's voice. Jungkook froze mid-motion, eyes snapping to Taehyung standing in the doorway, panic clear on his face. Fire. Taehyung's words came in full, strong, unbroken. His voice, returned. Not just a whisper, but a command born from fear and urgency. Jungkook turned sharply, grabbing a towel to beat down the small flames, heart hammering. Not with fear for himself, but for Taehyung. The young man's face was pale, eyes wide, hands trembling, but his presence had saved them both. As the last of the fire hissed and died under Jungkook's hands, he turned toward Taehyung, who was still trembling but watching him intently. Jungkook pulled him close without hesitation, pressing his forehead against Taehyung's. "You're safe," Jungkook whispered, voice soft but full of awe. "You saved me, and you found your voice." Taehyung blinked, lips trembling, then laughed softly, incredulous, disbelief and relief mingling. I can speak." "Yes," Jungkook murmured, holding him tighter. "And it's perfect." For the first time in years, Taehyung felt fully alive, fully heard, and fully safe. The fire had been terrifying, but it had also broken the last barrier. His silence. Jungkook's presence, his protection, and the sheer adrenaline of fear had pushed his voice back to the surface. They stayed in the kitchen like that for a long while, holding each other, the smoke lingering faintly, the burnt smell heavy but irrelevant. Words flowed now between them, not just help or stop, but laughter, murmurs, and soft confessions. Their intimacy, emotional and physical, had reached a new depth, strengthened by trust, protection, and shared vulnerability. Later, they finally resumed breakfast, sitting side by side at the table, hands brushing, voices blending naturally. Taehyung's smile was brighter than Jungkook had ever seen, and every time their fingers touched, every soft glance exchanged, it spoke of healing, love, and safety that neither had known before. The mansion was quiet again. Not the cold kind of quiet Taehyung grew up with, but the soft, lived-in warmth that felt like morning sunlight settling gently on the skin. It had been a year since the wedding chaos. A year since Lisa's runaway. Since scars from the past began to loosen their grip. Since Jungkook slowly, carefully opened doors Taehyung never knew he was allowed to step through. The garden had changed. The roses Taehyung once tended with trembling hands were tall now, blooming in deep red and pale cream. A new peach tree grew near the corner. Jungkook had planted it with him on their first spring together. Taehyung walked between the flowers barefoot, the cool grass brushing his ankles. His steps were lighter now, his breathing calmer, his hands steadier. He was not the trembling boy who flinched at footsteps in hallways. He was someone new, someone growing, someone loved. A soft footstep behind him made him turn. Jungkook was standing at the terrace door, hair messy from sleep, shirt loose, eyes still warm from dreaming. When he looked at Taehyung, really looked at him, his gaze softened the way it had 100 times before, the way Taehyung was still learning to believe. "Good morning," Jungkook murmured. Taehyung smiled, small, beautiful, real, and said back, "Good morning." Jungkook stepped down from the terrace and walked toward him, grass brushing his ankles too. When he reached Taehyung, he didn't say anything at first. He simply wrapped his arms around Taehyung from behind, Resting his chin on his shoulder, Taehyung leaned into him without hesitation. That still amazed Jungkook, the way Taehyung no longer hid the softness in him. The past still existed, but it no longer ruled him. After a moment, Jungkook whispered, "You're glowing today." Taehyung rolled his eyes, cheeks warming, but Jungkook laughed softly and brushed a kiss to the side of his neck. A quiet, loving kiss that made Taehyung's heart flutter like wings. Then Jungkook held out something small, a folded envelope. Taehyung blinked, confused. "Open it," Jungkook said, smiling gently. Taehyung unfolded the paper. It was a registration form for a music academy, a prestigious one. His breath caught. "You can audition whenever you want," Jungkook said softly. "If you want to. If you don't, that's fine too. I just thought maybe the world deserves to hear the way you speak." Taehyung's eyes filled instantly, not with fear, not with shame, with something he never thought he'd be allowed to feel again. Dreams. He turned, grabbing Jungkook's wrist with both hands, shaking his head in disbelief, overwhelmed. Jungkook cupped his face gently.